Be yourself positive. Just another mindset.
Hello, friends, and welcome to a new episode of the Just Another Mindset podcast. We need a paradigm shift if it comes to our economic and social systems. Let us drive this change together. The Just Another Mindset podcast shares inspiration and tangible techniques on how to create seismic shifts in an outdated system, collectively and for individuals alike. My name is Ismail, and each week I bring to you a relevant conversation, message, or theme that will not only entertain you, but help you to change towards a more meaningful and satisfying life. Get encouraged by listening to successful thought leaders, inspiring individuals, and impressive changemakers. Change from within will last and create positive results for all of us. Let us get inspired and embrace collective changes for the better. In today's episode, I share a conversation with you that I had with Carla. Carla is the Deputy Director at the Basel Agency for Sustainable Energy, BASE. Carla looks back at a successful and decade-long career with significant experience on sustainable development issues, focusing on climate change mitigation and adaptation, as well as on sustainable energy finance. She has worked with multilateral organizations, the private sector, NGOs, and academia on a broad range of working assignments, including the design, assessment, and supervision of projects, environmental analysis, and financial modeling. Carla loves animals and nature, and today you will hear why. In this episode, we talk about nature, economics, and how to appreciate both. You will learn why Carla has been working for and with nature for decades. And you will hear how to expose yourself to novel topics and ideas and how that helps to foster the understanding of yourself. We discuss nature-oriented economic systems and how sustainable finance can actually help our interconnected ecosystems. We talk about the low level of well-being experienced, particularly in the global north, and what all of us can do in order to change something about it, personally and collectively. Finally, we discuss examples on how we can move our economic systems from a growth paradigm towards more prosperity and actual well-being for all of us. And with that, Carla, a warm welcome to the Just Another Mindset podcast. And my first question for you today is, how do you feel and what's on your mind?
Wow, I feel great, to be honest, but tired at the same time. I'm sort of like happy to be here. And as I mentioned before, we started the recording, is the fact that I feel engaged. I'm sort of happy to be able to talk freely about so many things that at the end for many years use my mind, that I think they are quite relevant. And that's one of the reasons why I've been so busy lately as well. So, but this is part of my life. So I would say I'm very positive. So that would be a summary of the tiredness and the happiness and the excitement and everything together.
Wonderful. I can hear that excitement. And for everybody listening, Carla and myself actually started off record with taking a deep breath because both of us already had quite a few meetings and conversations today. And here we are. So, Carla, I think it does make sense to give a little bit of a context to our audience before we talk about all those interesting activities and initiatives that you're currently involved with. And another question that I noted down for myself is, what did you study and why?
Okay, so first of all, let me tell you a little bit about myself. So then maybe the context is even like bigger. I am from Chile in South America. And at that time, when I went to university, that was several years ago. Chile is still, I would say, a very traditional country. So if you were going to university, you had sort of like, let's say, 5 options. because otherwise everyone would tell you, oh, you're gonna, I don't know, you're not gonna make a living and stuff like that. So you would become either a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, sort of maybe an architect. That was on the, I'd say, on the edge of making or not making a living. And then what I studied, that if I had to translate that to English, it would be business engineering. So basically, it had the focus on business. It was a program that you could do two main tracks. One had to do with business, anything that was like human resources, marketing, finance, and the other one was economics. And don't ask me why, but I did both. So I was one of the few who did both, and maybe because I really like sort of like both fields. I was really into finance at the time, but I thought economics was quite relevant. So that was sort of my first degree. And first degree in Chile is 5 years. So it's like a long, like first degree. And then after I worked for a few years. I'm not going to say on what still. But after that, I moved to the US and I went to do a master's on natural resource economics. And the whole idea was to try to combine now my forever passion, that was like the environment, with something that I had studied. And to be honest, I enjoyed my time there. I made great friends. It opened my mind, but at the same time, I felt that it was very much sort of like the same sort of economic theory applied to a different topic, but not treated as the way that I wanted to be treated. So I finished my degree, and at the end of the day, I say I'm an environmental economist. However, I don't necessarily apply that. I started working more on maybe on the management side, on the environment side. How do I bring these passions together? So it's sort of, I'm going to leave it there in terms of the studies.
How much of a thing was natural resource economics or becoming an environmental economist back then? Meaning, was that a really niche thing to do? And how was also the acceptance? Because I suppose that didn't fall into the category of the 5 studies, 5 jobs that you outlined earlier that were the path to go in Chile.
Yeah, that's quite funny because I have a couple of anecdotes about that. In the US, I would say it was something that people maybe would sort of understand. But when you were in the field of maybe development organizations, they would sort of know what you were trying to do. They had an idea. So because there are a lot of like academics working on the field, and even at that time. But if it was, let's say, in Chile, no clue. People thought, oh, what are you going to go and study? And I say, okay, I'm trying to combine things that I like. And once I finished my master's, I moved to Greece for personal reasons. And I remember I started looking for jobs there. And I said, who do I reach out to? So I was reaching at the beginning environmental organizations. And when I said what I study, they would look at me and ask me, what is that? So what do you do? So clearly there was no understanding. I like to say nowadays that I was very innovative, put it that way. But it's nothing to do what like the whole environmental and sustainability topic is today, that you, I don't know, lift any little stone and you're gonna have someone talking from different angles about the topic. At that time it was really rare, and that's how it was challenging, but the passion is never killed by anything. So
absolutely.
That's why I kept going.
That's good. Wonderful. And what was then the first position or a position that you want to talk about after graduate school, when you basically, joined the career force?
So when I finished this like business engineering, I joined a bank, and I was in the treasury of the bank. I was first in what's called the securities agency, and then in the actual bank. I was initially, and for quite a while, the only woman in that space. That was really rare also to find women working in that space. And although, again, I enjoy the finance element, I like finance, I like math, I love maths, I would say. I've been a fond of maths all my life. I think it's a really useful tool. It explains so many things, even in nature, that I don't regret that time. But I felt that I was sort of, when you start like you start sort of dividing yourself, because on one hand I was still very involved, like trying to help the environment or help animals. I love animals as well. And I was doing this work that it had to do with money, but money for the sake of money, let's say it like that. I felt that I say, look, this is not me. And that's why after 2 years working, before that, I decided I was going to go and study. And I was given, of course, you start talking in the bank, and they told me, like, if you want, we can try to help you. You could go and do an MBA. And this is something that companies like that would do. And maybe they sponsor you and then they want you back. But really, I realized that that was not for me. So I say, thank you, but no, thank you. And I've been, I would say, lucky, because when I was finishing my studies at university, I had the chance to participate in a conference that was on the topic of like environmental natural resource economics. And I met a professor from the university that later on I moved to in the US. And he was really supportive of me going to the States. And because maybe the fact that there were not many like Chilean, in this case, like working on the field, that I managed to get these kind of positions where you are also like an assistantship to the teachers, not to him, to someone else, but that would really help me economically to finance the studies. Because by that time, it was like me helping a lot in my house. In my house while I was living with my parents. That was very typical at that age, that you finish university and you stay living with your parents forever and ever, and then until maybe one day you get married or they kick you out. So for me, that was the option I had. I didn't have savings. I had some savings, but I was of course concerned about like my family in Chile. And then I like the fact that I could have this assistantship that meant also health insurance associated with it, waiver of most of the tuition, things like that. So that was it was a deal breaker for me. If I was not taking that, I would have been really, I don't know, what am I thinking about? Like, this is a great option because it gives me opportunity. It opens a new door. And I took it and I opened that new door. And one day I took off from Chile. That was in 1995.
Okay, wonderful. And what is it that you studied then with opening this door?
So that's when I went to study environmental economics, this natural resource economics. So
okay, understood. So this is how the circle closes. And Carla, today you're not dialing in from the US, meaning you didn't stay there, but you have been living, I suppose, for more than a decade in Switzerland. I would also be interested understanding why and maybe also what brought you to Switzerland.
Yes, I've been living in Switzerland for the last almost 14 years. And to be honest, I'm quite happy here. I came from the US, having lived before in Greece also for a while, having spent also a few months in the Netherlands. So I have a little bit of experience in a few places. And at the time that I was in the US, my husband, who he's from, first of all, I would like to say a very supportive husband. He's really my partner in crime. He supports everything that I do, every crazy thing, every crazy idea. He's really there for me. And I love that. And I really love him a lot because of that and many other good features. So that was a parenthesis. He used to work for the World Bank. And he got the opportunity of a secondment here in Switzerland at a big also development, it's an international organization, not a development one. And we took that option because several things. He comes from Europe. And we really wanted to explore the life in Europe. We always had the dream, okay, why don't we go and live in Europe? And we started sort of like thinking of the different countries that we could be in. We were started saying, oh, what about if we go to England? And he had studied in the UK, so he said, oh, it's too like maybe gloomy, it rains a lot. Okay, what about if we go to France? It sounds like we love wine, and both of us. I said, yeah, but we don't speak French. So basically, my French is very poor. I do speak some, but don't ask me anything in French, please. And at one moment we thought, oh, what about Switzerland? That would be great. It's in the middle of everything. I said, yeah, but we don't speak German, French or Italian. So it was sort of like just ideas. And when this opportunity came, and we said, okay, let's take it. And initially we moved for 2 years. That was the first deal. That got extended to a third year, fourth year, and then seeing the quality of life that we had here, having family around, because just for you to know, I have a sister who lives in Germany as well. She's married to a German and works in Germany, and she's also she's my best friend, to be honest. So having her so close, and my husband's family is in Europe, so there were a lot of good things. But I would say two main elements that I love and I still love from this place. One is the safety element, especially if you have kids, and we have two children that now they're not really kids, they're like more grown up, I would say, but they can be extremely independent since early on, but at the same time that independence comes through with like responsibility, so they grow like at a good pace, but really exposed to the world, because they can really be on their own and like move on their own. Like the public transport system is excellent here, so they can really just walk the bus or the tram or whatever. So that was a really important point. But second, what I really appreciate from the place, and especially maybe coming from the US, is the fact that here the society is quite minimalistic, I would say. One. Two, they enjoy nature, they protect nature. So within like a developed country, I'd say they're quite I would say advanced on that. It's not that it's perfect. But like I felt that I was within an environment that's sort of like supported my principles more than where I was coming. That I really love like being in the US. I have many good friends. I think this is a place where you can reinvent yourself when you go to the US. Europe is more rigid in that regard. However, it's like the US is still the society of like the bigger you have of whatever, the better it is. And I say, no, that's not who I am. So I would say those two elements made us sort of like take the decision at the end. For my husband, he got this opportunity of changing jobs, basically switching to the local organization, and he did that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I actually have a couple of follow-up questions. And you talked about nature, and you already mentioned that you love animals. But before we go there, what you just mentioned is that it aligns with your principles. And if you're willing to share what those principles are, I would be very interested. And then maybe from there we can understand, when did you formulate those principles? Or is it something that you do once a year or once every 5 years? So when did you explore those principles, and what are they? Would be another follow-up question.
Perfect. So I would say there's one principle that rules, and it's about caring. I would say that's something that I was raised in a family. We are caring for others, and by others I mean not just humans, like any kind of species. It was something that was really, I don't know, ingrained in my DNA, I would say. And I would see it firsthand from my parents, caring, from helping friends or whoever when they were in need, like helping like stray animals, that's an issue in my country. And because of that, I would say that has driven my actions throughout my life. And this is the main thing that I try to sort of also share. And with my family, I say, look, I don't mind if you are like, could be rich or poor, but if you don't care, if you do things just because for you are not thinking like the impact that whatever you're doing can have on others, or not looking on how to help others, I say, what's the point of everything? So that I would say that's the number one, without a doubt. Then that brings maybe other principles in terms of like, of always, and it's something maybe you learn or you develop with the like as the years pass is the fact of being open to listening to others. It's not that I'm always like I'm really good at talking, as you have seen, and not necessarily listening, but I force myself because you can always learn so much from others. And with others, I mean, not just the ones that you tend to admire, oh, this person knows so much. No, it could be from anyone in society. I would say from like a lower or higher social class, complete different backgrounds, complete different ages. Because at the end of the day, I believe that the world is a very complex place and no one on their own is able to address the issues that we live. So by being open, you learn so much, you get so much, and you can also share what you know. People sometimes tends to think that, oh no, I don't know so much about that or whatever. Yeah, but maybe for someone else you do know about that topic a lot, or the way that you have like, I don't know, um, develop something and making it work. So at the end, this sharing of experiences, I think that sort of also drives, that's a really important principle, to be open, to listen to others. And I would say, and then of course, one that can come with the years as well, but because of my focus on sustainability is about we need to be sort of like fair in terms of the sharing stuff. It's this concept of like just having more for the purpose of having more doesn't apply to me. I'm a very sort of simple person and I appreciate simplicity. I appreciate the value of things, not for the thing, but for the utility that they can provide, but not just, yeah, not just to us, it's to like the whole environment. So like the whole like species. That's why I, at the end of the day, I'm someone that if you touch my heart somehow, I'm gonna act. I don't like, even if it's a complex and maybe difficult thing, instead of me sort of closing and saying, no, this is too overwhelming, I'm stopping here, I'm the contrary. I say, okay, I need to do something. And it's not that I'm solving the whole issue, but I'm contributing towards that. So I would say that. So in terms of when, the caring, since I remember, I always had like, even today, my mom is like, she's the person who really sort of like, I don't know, set me in life. And the rest, I think, is a process. It's not like a New Year's resolution where you say, oh, these are the principles for this year. No, it's just you. At the end, the principles are a reflection of who you are. So it's you being shaped over time. So of course they can. I wouldn't say they can evolve, but I tend to think like that you accumulate them more than just changing them, unless of course there can be some drastic changes. But in my case, it hasn't been that.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And I would be very interested if something comes to mind. If you talk about being open and listening to other people, and what I hear anyways is leaving your very own bubble, because we all live in different bubbles. And I would be very interested, are there actual activities that you do to leave your comfort zone, or to go to conferences on topics that you have no clue about, or do new activities every once in a while? How do you practice the muscle of staying and keeping an open mind?
Like, for instance, I have a very recent example of something that I like. I mean, of course, I don't go, let's say, to I don't know, a conference of doctors, because if I would be there, I wouldn't understand anything. I'm not a doctor. I don't have any kind of knowledge on that, and I'm not expecting to become my own doctor. But like going back to this idea that the world is a complex place and my drive for sustainability, let's say, I've learned a lot about, maybe I know a lot about finance. I've learned a lot about like ways to approach or actions to mitigate climate change, because I've worked for many years on that. And it's not, again, I'm not going to be the designer of the action, but I would say I have that very good overview of what are the issues at stake, who should we bring on board, and maybe the expertise that we need there, and take it into action, and then learning out of the successes and failures. And that's within that beyond, you have to deal with tons of different professions that I'm not an expert at all. So throughout my career, I worked for, just to name a few, with glaciologists, with meteorologists, with urban planners, just to name a few, lawyers, of course. And I'm not an expert on any of those. And recently, one of the things that I really am trying to explore more deep is how to apply what we do, and I'm gonna maybe talk later about that. That's about like maybe financial instruments to try to bring good to the planet. How can we really start working with nature, but from this sort of like way that we do it right now? And that means that for me, going to places where I can learn about nature. How do you measure whether what is nature? What is positive or negative nature-wise? One thing, if you see a tree or a set of trees there, you would say, oh, is that good or is it bad? And sometimes it could be good or it could be bad as well, depending on the composition. How do you grow that trees? It's just like trees, or is it a full ecosystem? And name it, and many more things that I don't even know. And then associated with that, you have tons of new professions that, again, I'm not an expert at all in. From maybe soil experts that they're going to be trying to, measure the amount of carbon in the soil, to, agriculture experts. What do you put there? How do you put it when let's say, when you're working on trying to bring back this sort of like more species that used to grow, and that they're less commercialized, I'd say, but sometimes they are the ones with more capacity to adapt to changes in climate. So of course, I try to go to these things, and something that I recently joined that I appreciate so much, and you cannot imagine how much. And I was very lucky to be there last week. It was a summit that took place here in the Alps, in a little town called Villars, and it's a fantastic place. So if you're in Switzerland, come to Villars. There is this relatively new foundation called the Villars Institute. And the approach that they have, they really want to address complex issues from an interdisciplinary approach, using an interdisciplinary approach, but also a co-generational approach. That means that in the event, we had top scientists and we had students as well. And that, for me, touches my heart from many angles. One, because it gives me the opportunity to be exposed to this level of knowledge of many things that I don't know. I'm not going to become a specialist, but at least it gives me the sort of like, I feel that I'm part of this world, that I have a level of understanding that, again, allows me to use that information, make decisions, or develop something, of course, involving people. So you build this network of people that do different things, and then something can come out of that. And second is the fact that I am a believer that when we are dealing with all these problems like this, not just climate change, this climate change is one of the planetary boundaries. And with that, maybe I'm revealing with one of the scientists that I really admire, Johan Rockström, is the fact that we cannot just assume that the next generation, the youth, are going to solve problems for us. It's not about that what we did. You're going to have you had to address it, like maybe technology is going to be there, whatever. And I say that's not fair, number one. But second, if we don't really sort of like at least share as much as we know now with them, in terms of the sciences, in terms of the solving complex problems, in terms of leadership, it's very difficult for them one day maybe to go from a middle school to high school, or even from high school to university, from university to the workforce, to suddenly a slap in the face saying, oh, now you have to solve the problems of the world. So that's why I'm an advocate of like sustainability education or learning, because it's not just about one period, it's throughout life. And I'm being actively involved in that. So the fact that you had in one place convening these generations, but it's not that they had a spot only and there you have your corner. They would be encouraged throughout the whole event to participate, to speak up. They were listened to. And in this case, in this event particular, I would say maybe they were 20 compared to maybe 220 adults. but this is a selected group. But the same institute like promotes, like in the middle of the year, they're going to have another event when they bring a bigger chunk of students compared to the number of like adults they are to specialists. But what I'm saying, it was not the typical thing where like, oh yeah, we bring the youth so they are like happy, but we sort of like move on with our own agenda. No, here is really is, let's put them there on the stage. Let's give them appreciation, and let's try to help them, because like if they start thinking systemically about these complex things now and they've been given the tools to do that, then they're really gonna become problem solvers in the future. And so it's a sort of like this mentality of changing generations. So that's an example of how I do like to be. It's not necessarily outside of your comfort zone, but be exposed to things that I'm not an expert in necessarily, but I know that from my niche I can contribute somehow, because at the end of the day, no one is expert on everything, so we need to come together, and this is sort of like an example of that.
Wonderful. And I'm very happy to hear that you had an amazing time, because I suppose our pre-talk was happening just before you left for that weekend. And I would like to explore another topic which you have mentioned a couple of times, and that is nature. And I would like to understand, what role does nature play in your life, and has it always?
I would say, I don't know, maybe it sounds cliche, but I love nature. I think it has to do with the fact that I love animals. I was always attached to, and maybe I associate like animals to nature, because this from nature is something that I can clearly see. I can see not just a static thing, but maybe you can see a static tree, although the tree with the wind moves and stuff like that. But you see it like come to life, like act within the place, and then having a life, of course, if we allow them. And I would say that I would say is number one. Growing in Chile, I was like I grew up in a city, but still I think it has to do with like the appreciation maybe of, again, I remember when I was young, we would have maybe the typical horticulture, like the small like vegetable garden, and when not so small, we did have some fruit trees and stuff like that. So again, it's maybe coming close, understanding that the fruit comes from a tree or from a plant or from something. I would say you start building up on that, the fact that I like the animals, then the fact that where the animals live, understanding this concept of ecosystems, and then that starts opening doors, because for instance, I always like to refer to a couple of things. One is that when you are born in a city, and maybe I think it's even, I don't know, more common nowadays, you need water, you go and open the faucet without ever questioning where the water comes from. But when you start like sort of like, I don't know, trying to figure out where it comes from, and then through my career I had opportunity also to be, because of climate change, related with water related projects. You see, okay, yeah, it comes from maybe from the rain or from the aquifer, but the rain, you need these catchment areas, and then you start realizing that we somehow collected somewhere there. And again, if that nature, that ecosystem is not working properly, we're not going to have it. So then you start opening yourself and exploring these sort of frontiers beyond the city life, let's say. Yeah. So this, again, once you open your eyes to something and something like that, you see everything under that lens maybe, and you start appreciating that, in this case, nature more and more, because for me, nature is not something that lives next to me. I am a full element of nature. So without nature, I cannot exist. And I'm not saying that I care for nature because I want to exist. No, I care for nature because I'm grateful about it. There's the wonders that it has, the fact that how things like, I don't know, operate, how they function. For me, every day is like I'm stunned by, oh, wow, how is this possible? And at the end, and that appreciation is what really brings me back to nature. And then I would like to add something else. And again, given all the issues that we see nowadays, that you hear more and more, this whole, not discussion, really reality about like mental health, nature really helps you towards that. And not just as an adult, I say like the exposure of like children to nature, to learn to value that, but also like if you go into a walk in a forest, you really come back with energy. It allows you to meditate while you're doing your walks, your runs, or whatever. So I feel that is such an important element that we need to bring back. We need to reconnect ourselves with the soil because we have lost that connection. Because, for instance, another example I was going to mention, I said the water. I told you about the water example first, but then also years ago when I was living in the US, I was part of a program that would we were initially trained, and then every year would receive some training. We would do training on our own through universities and stuff like that, and we would participate in a voluntary program teaching about horticulture in general. So I had the opportunity to work a lot with fourth graders. So that's, I don't know, 10 years old, some 10, 11, something around that. And we would do this class with a very close friend of mine that's really, I don't know, much like me in terms, we think very similarly. So we would start like asking the kids, okay, so what's your favorite food? And lots of them would say pizza. And then we would start separating the ingredients. And then you would ask them, so, okay, you tomatoes, whatever, I don't know, the pepperoni, the cheese. Okay, so where did the tomatoes come from? And they would say, the supermarket. And I say, what? And there was not just one case, it was constant. And then we saw that disconnection. And maybe that again, as I told you earlier on, when I perceive an issue and it's something that touches my heart, I develop this drive to do something. And that sort of like have sort of pushed me towards where I am now. So this build up a lot of little things like guiding me through life, I would say.
It sounds like. And let's use this disconnection, or rather this interconnectivity, for a follow-up question. And you've talked to that a little bit, but the 5 key issues discussed at COP27 last year are in fact nature, food, water, industry decarbonization, and climate adaptation. And what my question would be in regard to interconnectivity, what is it that we as citizens, as individuals, as humans underappreciate about nature and its interconnectivity?
I would say is the fact that we treat nature as something on the side. We think that we are like, not nature, that we are like nature is there and we are here. Okay. So that disconnection has generated, I think, most of the problems that we have. And especially when you think of nature, if someone tells me about the Arctic, oh, the Arctic is really far from me. I've never been to the Arctic. Someone can say, okay, the Amazon. Oh yeah, the Amazon again is very far from me. And it's a place maybe I wouldn't go there because, I don't know, it would be scary, it would be too hot, it would be whatever. So, but why? Because they see it as something separate from them. They don't see the relationship, even if we are far away, the role that they play, because nature is the basis for everything. We have a planet that will keep operating if we are not here, and it will operate better than if we're not here, to be honest. So that has generated that like we move on without really thinking the impact that we're having. And especially because we live in a society under an economic system that I'm not saying, like, and with this, I'm going to be very clear, I'm not against capitalism, not at all. I do think that capitalism brings a lot of innovation, creativity, but when we start moving towards the greediness, I think there's something wrong here. And the issue, the lack of connectivity, the fact that we are not connected to nature, is I would say we are like, and we are so connected to the economy, to the economic system, because everything that we do, we need money. I want to go to have a coffee, I need money to buy the coffee. I want to go to the movies, I need money to pay for the movies. I want to go to a party and I need clothes, I need money to buy clothes, etc., etc., etc. And then social standards pushes you to, okay, if you want to be sort of like successful, success is being measured maybe to which school you went, the university, the place you work. No one is asking you whether you're happy, it's whether you are successful, and successful many times is measured in terms of money. So it's being created that if I want to be this successful person, that therefore I'm going to make money, I'm going to be in this top university, this top job, whatever. It doesn't matter if I'm crap as a person. It doesn't matter if I'm destroying nature. And sometimes we even destroy now. We are so disconnected without really knowing that we are like having an impact on it. But because you're so focused on your target of being successful and the I would say the metrics that are like considered okay, that you start like, I don't know, building this sort of like reinforcing this connectivity. And nowadays, for instance, when we talk about like all the problems you mentioned, climate change, and now, for instance, that people are starting to talk more and more of nature, biodiversity, they see it, okay, oh, let's focus on climate change, and then later on we can focus on biodiversity and nature. And say, look, these are two systems that are completely interconnected. Let's start, let me be clear, first of all. The economic system, our economic system, climate change, biodiversity, they're all completely related. The economic system would not even exist if there was no nature. So, and again, when I'm talking about climate change, it's not, oh, I'm going to solve climate change without looking into biodiversity. I'm going to solve climate change without looking into poverty. All these elements are so connected, and that's why we need to address them from this more holistic, this more complex way of doing things. It's not about that you have to try to simplify to send correct messages, encouraging messages, because if you just present a complexity, like, I don't know, a really sort of like, I don't know, web of a lot of things connected, people are, of course, are going to, I don't know, be overwhelmed. But always, although maybe your message could be on the simple messages, you still need to be aware that things are connected. Back in your mind, you cannot forget about that. And that's why when we say about protecting the Amazon, it's not just about the trees in the Amazon, the animals in the Amazon, the fungi in the Amazon, whatever. It's the whole ecosystem, everything that entails that ecosystem, but also because the Amazon provides ecosystem services. It regulates, for instance, the water cycles there. Again, I'm not the expert to tell you exactly what's the impact, but clearly we know that. So without an Amazon, rain patterns would change completely, let's say in this case, not just in Latin America, everywhere. So when we are doing is like, we need to reconnect. So at the end, when you connect, when you establish that sort of like emotional connection, I think that's when you start caring. And that's why it's so important that we develop a narrative that is built on how can we reconnect to nature emotionally. What is there? Is it because I like nature, because I like walking in the forest? Is it because, like, I don't know, I had an experience? Is it because I come from a country where, like, the I don't know, nature biodiversity is important? There are so many reasons why, but we need to start like changing the narrative so we come back to nature and start appreciating, not just, oh, it's nice, but really understanding at a level good enough for us to realize that we need to act, or at least we need to avoid doing things that are gonna be harmful towards nature.
And also at the same point, at the same time, avoid a tunnel vision and say, okay, now we're going to solve climate change, and then in 3 years we're going to save the ecosystem, and then in 5 years we're going to do this and that. But this interconnectivity. And Carla, let's use that, and I would like to actually use a quote of yours here. And in your article, "We are not out of the woods yet. Putting nature at the center of climate action and beyond," from December 2022, you write that in our current economic ecosystem, services and asset values are not reflected in the price of goods or the costs of land use. We need a shift from an economic-oriented to a nature-oriented perspective to overcome this disconnection. And my question would be, what is a nature-oriented economic model that you envision? I don't know if you have some examples, some thoughts, some hopes that you would like to share with us.
I wish I had like the exact answer for that. I don't. But the whole idea of like this nature-oriented or nature-positive approach is the fact that, as I mentioned there are tons of externalities, I would say, of like the way we operate nowadays that are not taken into account. So the fact that we pollute, or in this case, that with different pollutants, the fact that we are generating climate change with like carbon emissions or carbon equivalent emissions. And those are not reflected in the actual price because, for instance, if I if I'm gonna, let's say, if I'm polluting, but the fact that I'm polluting is not reflected, I don't have to pay anyone for polluting. Of course, I'm a free rider. I'm like making this place very dirty, and I'm making money by selling the products maybe that I produce while polluting. So we need to change towards something that and this is like this discussion for, I don't know, even when I studied, when this was an issue, this was like main discussion, this whole idea of the polluter's principle, that you need to pay for what you pollute because that's the only way that you can internalize that externality. So the idea is that if we could adapt some of the rules of the game in terms of really bringing those externalities to the prices, that would be a game changer. In what sense? That if you have like two options of a product A versus product B, product A maybe is cheaper because like no one paid for the pollution that was generated or the damage that was generated. Product B does like operates in a different way, and or they try to address the negative impacts, and because of that is more expensive. So when you are like consumer, the average consumer, you tend to associate, oh, I'm going to go for the cheaper because I can buy more. Do I need more? Maybe I don't need more, but I'm going to go with the cheaper because then I have some money left over for something else. So we are competing like in an unfair situation. Okay. So as I mentioned, the way that we operate nowadays, we're so disconnected that nature is not like, although we are harming nature, we are doing a lot of damage to nature. That's not reflected in the prices of things that we do in a daily life. So if we don't start like bringing those on board, like considering it as part of the whole package of producing our lifestyles of today, of course the decisions that we are making are going to be based on wrong data because I have wrong prices. The price signal is not correct. So on one hand is how do we sort of start like internalizing all those externalities? That's number one, I would say. But I'm hopeful and maybe wishful thinker in terms of that. I really hope that people, by doing that, they and also learning more, building this emotional connection that I mentioned earlier on, you start taking care of your decision of like, it's not just based on price now. Okay, maybe the field has been leveled. Now you start taking other elements into consideration where you appreciate nature because now you connected with nature. So you start thinking not just in like not harming nature, but benefiting nature. How do I make this place that gives me the opportunity to live even better? And I'm not thinking better for the next generation or for whatever after that. I'm thinking for the sake of nature. It's like, as you, like, we can have a relationship between two humans where, like, one gives and the other one gives something in return because they care, not because you give me something, I'm going to give you something in return. Could we establish something like that with nature as well, where it's beyond me only just paying because now that everything has been internalized, now that I know prices is everything? No. Can we reconnect with nature? Can we? That's the way that nature positive comes into effect, because at the end of the day, we start talking about not just, let's say, protecting nature, like conserving nature. We start talking about regenerating nature. And nowadays you hear more about like regeneration of natural systems. It could be from like the circular economy sort of like point of view. It could be from like discussions about like capturing carbon as well. But like the idea and the hope that I had, that vision, is like to be that is not just because of that, it's because we care, we recognize. Like I wouldn't do anything against my parents, especially if I'm like I'm really dependent on them, because not just because they provide for me, because I care for them. So can we treat maybe nature as our parents, that I want to provide for nature as well, and not just think of me.
How would you discuss or argue about, because I do agree, but I also sometimes feel like either you are at a certain economic level in the global north that you can and want to think about nature, or in fact that you are at a very low economic level in the global south and it's somewhat ingrained. You care for nature and you do not take advantage of nature, or you do not dominate nature. But there is a whole sphere in between. So there are a lot of people who say they do care for nature, but it's, as you said, not enough to go for the more pricey item, or not enough to take this alternate mean of transportation. What is it that you would discuss or argue about the separation of such and putting nature at the forefront? How can we do that?
Yeah, I think like for like my generation and maybe yours, it's something, or maybe yours is a little bit easier. Let's put it that way. It's difficult because we were raised like believing certain things, and those things were supposed to be right. So if you start challenging that, people tend to resist. So you need to sort of like, I would say, change the narrative, start building that emotional connection, but also maybe start changing the messenger, I would say. And with that, I want to refer to the importance again of like engaging with the youth. If there's someone, I would say that maybe adults are going to be more open to listening to, are going to be their kids or their grandkids or their nephews, nieces, whatever they are. And it's not that I want to sort of brainwash the youth, not at all. I want them to be exposed to learnings, to knowledge out there, and to tools that would allow them to develop their own way of thinking, but with proper information, so at the end they can become this driver. You mentioned something that is very true, that even and this again goes to this sort of like the problem of the complexity, how everything is connected, and is the fact that on one hand we tend to think that the people that have, I don't know, that really has very limited resources or access to very limited resources, they tend to appreciate nature because maybe they really depend on nature, and that could be true. But at the same time, we have this, it's a reality, the fact that sometimes nature is the only thing they have. So the only way to make a living or even to access food, to heat, whatever, is by destroying nature. If you ask them, they're not necessarily the ones that say, oh, I'm doing it because I enjoy doing this thing. And I clearly, for instance, there are a couple of examples I may think of. One has to do with like typical the collection of biomass, the wood basically. In you see it a lot in Africa, especially for like heating, for cooking. And they even have to work for hours, so they spend a big chunk of the day just finding this wood. And at the end of the day, that's a driver of deforestation, or a driver of like killing whatever nature is there. But when you realize that for these people, that means, okay, I need to eat. Let's start. If you're hungry, how can you think of anything else? And that's why this whole element of poverty, fairness, etc., comes into play when trying to solve any of these big complex issues, or like this, like I would say, climate change, biodiversity, whatever. I remember another case watching this documentary of the gold mining in the Amazon. And I remember I was shocked when I was seeing the images, and you see how with these sort of like pressure hoses, they were really sort of like carving the soil to find, and you'd see how the roots of trees started to become exposed. And at the end, of course, the trees would be destroyed, and just to collect all this dirt that has some gold in it and all the process. And then they would interview some of the people there. And people would say, I would love not to be able to do this, but this is the only way that I can have some resources. So although it's true that they appreciate it because they depend on nature, if they don't have the basics, and by basic for me, it means that food that they could provide, education. And education is not just about like be an expert on the latest technologies. Education, even like to value their own knowledge, because this is something that we have tend to sort of like, I don't know, maybe kill a little bit. Like we appreciate everything, the futuristic developments, but the ancient knowledge we try not to give so much importance. And although it should be given, because they have been the ones like living in harmony with nature for so many years, if we don't provide them like health stuff like that, how can we expect them to really be part of the solution? So you have that extreme, then you have this group in the middle that I really think it's the difficult group. It's not going to be the one that we change easily, but we need to address it through different like entry points, like the youth engagement, the this emotional connection. I don't know, try to make it like closer to them, but it's a huge question mark what can be done. But that should not stop us from trying. And of course, the ones that are like they live in this world of like the only thing that I care is the economy, but that's why I'm so maybe happy how the whole sort of discussion about the topic has changed, because now, for instance, we have like a whole financial system getting engaged with climate change, and now the door to biodiversity is being open as well, because they're starting to see it from the risk point of view. If I invest in something that, because of, let's say, regulatory concerns, is going to be like a stranded asset tomorrow, is it like a wise investment or not? Am I putting the money in the correct place? Or because of climate change, the impacts of climate change, at the end, your investment could be at risk, because maybe, I don't know, let's say you're doing agriculture and then in a zone like prompt to floodings. So at the end of the day, they are like, the approach has been very clever, because as you start talking their language, things that they care, so you start bringing this, it's not an emotional connection, but it's like a financial connection, because you can show that by not doing certain things, or by keep doing what they've been doing, they are really putting in like danger their own assets, their own resources. And that has been the way that I would say the world, maybe the corporate world, the financial world is moving towards to. And now nature has been open, and the easiest way to bring nature there has been under the umbrella of climate change, because we know that nature, like we think trees sequester carbon. So it's good to have trees. As I said early on, it's not just about having trees, it's about what do we have there. It's just trees, or is it really an ecosystem? But it's the low-hanging fruit. Nature can enter through that door. And once you enter the door, like you can open the discussion to other, I would say, more complex issues.
And then see where the open discussion about nature will take us. And I actually have a very recent question, because just before our call, I was actually on a training call from the Post-Growth Institute about post-growth entrepreneurship. And in one breakout group, we discussed financial initiatives or means and capital and nature as well. And the discussion was whether or not nature or climate change has just become the next thing to invest towards to. So meaning that nature is nice if it gives a positive return, but if it doesn't, then nobody really would care what would happen to nature. And I would be very interested if you see that we also need to change something about our understanding of the economic output, let's say, that it cannot only be capital. And maybe we can actually use this question to talk about a little bit about capital and the importance of such to drive change. But my first question would be, what do you say in regard to the long-term impact of investing into sustainability, climate change, and maybe also what are your desires not to see too much greenwashing or people just going with the old narrative, if you want to call it, for a green purpose?
Yeah, first of all, I would say that a couple of reactions to that. One is the fact that we keep talking about growth. And again, I think we have to acknowledge that we live in one planet, that at the end of the day, there are limited resources. So instead of talking about growth, I would like to talk about maybe prosperity is a word that's being used a lot, but it's this concept of like combining elements about well-being, about happiness, about fairness. So as I mentioned before, when I described sort of the three groups, and we had the group at the extreme, the one that is really economically driven, clearly you have to talk the language, and you talk the language from the point of view of risks, but you can also talk to them the language of opportunities. And of course, if you think it in very simple terms, trying to send a simple message, if you invest in something to make it better, at the end of the day, that's gonna give you better results. If you take care of your tree, you're gonna have better apples. If you don't take care of that tree, on the opposite, you start like hurting that tree, the chance is gonna be maybe it's gonna give you some apples today, or maybe a lot today, but tomorrow the tree is already weak. It's gonna give you less. On the contrary, the other one maybe at the beginning is gonna be a little bit, but you're gonna start building the capital. And here we're talking about actual, real capital, natural capital. While money-wise, we talked earlier on about this connection, and money-wise, there's also this connection, because when you think even, and maybe I could ask you like about where is your pension fund being invested? And maybe, I don't know, you're someone considering conscious today, you say, oh no, it's invested in some types of funds that they invest in all these ESG, environmental, social and governance sort of things that are happening out there, positive things for the world. But in reality, first of all, there's not unique standards for that thing. That could be one thing. But in many occasions, it's not even that. It's that you invested maybe in a financial sort of structure that is not necessarily investing in the company that's linked directly with the real economy. You have like a real economy. Someone the other day mentioned, and I like that sort of the way she described it. Just imagine that you have the real economy and the financial world, and then you have this tower coming up, and this tower basically represents all these new financial instruments we've developed on the basis of securities, it's this progressive creation of new instruments based on other instruments. So at the end, you're investing in something that could be an index, it could be something. The only thing you know is a return. But what is that return really means in terms of your impact in the real economy? You maybe know, oh, this is some kind of index associated with infrastructure. That's it, but you don't have a clue. So, and you think, and that promotes the short-term thinking that you are like, oh, I bought this sort of like product, and I'm maybe looking at, if I'm someone active, I'm looking how it's evolving based on whatever knowledge that I have, information, what I'm reading, I'm going to sell it. Because you're thinking only on this bypass, like I'm buying today, selling tomorrow, taking the profit. And what is this profit? Do you translate that profit into, oh, this company now is able to do something, or I help them to, I don't know, develop something? No, you're only thinking about like the money you took out of that, your return on your capital. So that's why financially we are so disconnected again with the real economy. So how can I, if I'm like, I don't know, someone on my retirement, and my concern, of course, is that I want to have the money that I receive every month to be able to buy food, health, whatever, entertainment, whatever I want to use it in. But I like, the only thing I'm looking at is this financial return, because that's going to allow me to buy a lot of things. But maybe that financial return that you're having is due to like things like this money being invested in places that you were not meaning to do harm, but the harm is being done anyhow. And that's when we fall into this other element that now you talk about the financial world going into ESG, sustainable finance, that I'm really I'm very pro the concept of sustainable finance. But when it's like an honest and really purpose-driven sustainable finance, because again, and that means that I do believe that the sustainable element has to be kept as close to the real economy as much as we can, because if we start building all these new instruments, again, we are going to lose that connection. That's number one. But second, because at the end of the day, you want to do it. I'm hoping that the mindset of people managing organizations or being financial or like real economy organizations, corporations, is changing so that they realize that investing in the thing is really positive. Maybe it's going to change your cash flow. You're not going to have everything today. Maybe you're going to have it in some years to come. But you are ensuring that it's not just in the next 5 or 10 years, it's going to be really in the next 20, 30, or 40. If you just think with that view of like tomorrow, the day after, you never have any incentives to try to make something better, because you just want to be sure that you are maximizing your profit from today. And then we fall into this idea of maybe this greenwashing, in what sense that if at the end of the day, I'm going to use the whole ESG discourse just to provide, now I have my sustainable investments. I'm a company, let's say, where I offer you these sustainable options. So my question would be, so what are the others? Are they unsustainable options? So if and these that you promote as sustainable, are they really sustainable, or you're just really using it as a new product that you can sell and putting the name, call it green or whatever, and you disclose? But if the information you disclose is a big report that has a lot of nice pictures, but at the end of the day, it's difficult to really capture the key essential elements that you say, look, there's an honest transparency here. That's when it becomes sort of like really tricky. And but then you fall into this trap that to be able to understand whether something is sustainable or not, first of all, you would need to read every single report. You would need to maybe be an expert on the topics that you don't have a clue. Again, let's say like a company saying, look, I'm invested in greening all this area, all this forest. Again, we fall into a question. Is it a forest like done by an invasive species? Is it really the development of an ecosystem or whatever? And these are sort of very simple questions, like any expert on the field would criticize me because I'm really being very simplistic. But these I would say are the things that are making it challenging today. Now I know there's a whole effort to really try to bring sustainable finance at the forefront, trying to push that, try to create standards that are more unified. And we keep, like, once you're in this boat, I really sort of like recommend everyone, let's keep rowing. And maybe what we have is not perfect, but let's try to move in the right direction, because if we're waiting for things to be perfect, we are not moving at all. Or we continue damaging. So, but and I think the ones, they're gonna be more and more believers coming to, in the sense that they're gonna, not believers, they're gonna be realizers. They're gonna realize that this makes sense, and it makes sense not just to use it as a PR, sort of like a element, but as a real knowledge that I can make money by also doing something good.
And I would be very interested to understand, how do you do your somewhat due diligence on a personal level, but maybe also on a professional level? And maybe we can translate that into ideas or thoughts that we want to share with the audience on how to choose and select initiatives or ideas, innovative products, services to either invest in or to support with any other resource that comes to mind.
I would say let's start by the personal level. It's not that I have a checklist and I do like a check of everyone. Let me use Ismail. Do you comply? Can I check all the boxes with you? No, but there are certain elements that, like, I don't know, maybe some kind of bias that you tend to have. If I get to know someone and that someone that tells me or comes up with not a direct comment, but clearly someone that doesn't care about, let's say, animals, so it's even on the side of harming, that for me is a no, absolutely. So forget it. I'm not part of that group. It's completely different to my beliefs. But I would say that's the only real extreme case that I know. Of course, I don't want to I'm thinking of people that are surrounding me usually. And then it has to do about having some kind of chemistry, and chemistry has to do really with, I think, chemistry, and this is a really is maybe it's a kind of friendship chemistry, and it happens, I think, when you do have certain ways of seeing the world. There's something that happens. There's some, again, connectivity that happens, that maybe it's this energy that we cannot see, but when you meet someone that somehow share not all your values, not all the things that you do, but some maybe this drive, the idea of there's an issue, you're gonna be there helping or whatever, acting. It could be acting in a complete different topic that I care about, but it's showing me traits of that person. And I think I'm not assessing them, like I would say on purpose, but I'd say something natural that is happening in my mind, in my soul, that you start feeling like closer and closer to those people. I would like to bring that very much close to the work environment, because in our work, when we are like hiring someone new, let's say we open like the job, like we publish the job posting and stuff like that. We usually receive tons of applicants. We do a selection based on like more like, I would say, skills that you see there, like knowledge, maybe it could be some languages depending on what are we looking for. But the moment we call for interviews, apart from of course understanding, like knowing the level of know-how they have on the topic, like priority number one for us is again that chemistry that we feel. Is it this person someone who we feel, because it's not about knowing, it's feeling, that can connect to the rest of the group? Does it fall into this mindset that we have, this vision? We are really a mission-driven organization. We really want to help at the end of the day with market-based mechanism be able to help not just the plant, but at the end it helps humans, help like the all the species that do something good. That nowadays maybe we frame it under the title climate, because that's the way for people to understand. But climate, as I said before, is nature. Climate is water. Climate is everything. Or everything is everything, because everything is interrelated. So we fall into this a feeling. I'd say it's like, do we have this chemistry? Do we feel that this person could really fit into the group? And that is really like a deal breaker for us, because we have had cases where we could have the two final candidates, and one is clever. You cannot imagine how clever it is compared to the other that's still clever, let's say. But at the moment of like this matching thing, you say, no, this maybe because it's very individualistic, the approach is not like a team player, and a really team player in the sense it's not just working in a team. It's about like this sort of like, again, this cooperation. We seek this constant cooperation, this constant sort of like motivation of our brain, and this brainstorming. That's where like ideas come from. So that I would say at the work level. In terms of the due diligence project wise, like we don't like, and just to clarify, we don't promote investments directly in any like in any company. I would say what we do is we develop ecosystems. So at the end, the players that make part of that ecosystem, being consumers, being sort of maybe companies that provide a service or a product, and the financial system, actors of the financial system, can cooperate, can like with different mechanisms that we design, we help them sort of like cooperate in such a way that is beneficial for the people, for the businesses, and for the planet. That's what we say. So again, because we start from, we don't necessarily do a selection of we're going to work with you, and you. Let's say we start with an idea. We do have some contacts, because throughout the years we start building contacts. Let's say it's a project about like agriculture and with farmers, and there are certain companies working and we know them in certain countries, and we're going to reach out. And of course you do a due diligence to see like the company, any issues happening with the company. At that level, of course you want to do that minimum due diligence. But then once you develop something, everything that we develop is open for everyone to use. It's not that we're benefiting a specific company or anything like that. We're willing to work with what we would call champions, those that are like willing to be there, to devote the time, to try to co-create with us whatever like mechanism we're trying to co-create. So in that regard, it's like beyond like the minimum due diligence to know that someone, I don't know, was like is not wanted in prison today, I would say, is about more that, again, the wanting to jump on the boat and rowing together with you, because at the end of the day, they recognize that we're already in the same boat. That's sort of, I would say, that where it's taking us. And of course, we have our formalities. You have a lot of formalities at any organization, but it's a lot about this joining forces, this acceptance that we could do something as long as we collaborate. It's not that otherwise it's not going to work.
Wonderful. And just a very quick one, if you talk about we and us and the professional context, who is we and us?
We and us. Now for the many years since I'm in Switzerland, almost for the full time, I work with it's a Swiss foundation called Basel. Initially, the name stands for Basel Agency for Sustainable Energy, because when it was created almost 22 years now, it was created with the idea of we are like what's called a UNEP, a specialized center, and focus on business model development, with the idea of, as I said before, how do we enable an ecosystem in such a way that the market instruments allow you to align the incentives, so at the end, without us, the market can continue operating in a proper way for the benefit of everyone involved and the planet. So this foundation initially had the name energy in the name. Now we refer usually as Base Foundation only, because our focus was energy efficiency and renewables. That was like the main topic. If we were talking about environment before, or climate, that's one of the topics that have been talked for many years. Mitigation was energy. But nowadays we go beyond that, because again, everything is complex. You cannot just read one thing alone. So we do work on many other fields that it has been like an organic growth. So we do from electrical mobility, we work a lot on circular economy, we do things with like adaptation, climate finance, and we're trying to, personally, I'm trying to see how can we bring the nature element now. What can we do with nature? And maybe it has to do with, there's so much development from the technology side that it's not just about innovation of business model, but also innovation technology, and how can we use that to try to create some kind of mechanism that would allow funds to flow towards nature. Because there is like an internalization of externality, or because at the end of the day, you can create some kind of, I don't know, currency out of those benefits, and maybe there are people willing to pay for that, and it's creating the market. How do you enable the market? So there are a lot of ideas there, nothing concrete yet, to be very honest, but I've started sort of the dialogue. It's talking to people, getting to know people who from different angles, different expertise, we want to converge towards something in the center. And I say when we converge, we're going to really manage to start like producing things that we're going to drive funding towards sort of nature solutions. So that's we. And just to say, and we are a group around 20 people more or less here in Basel. And the wonderful thing is that people sometimes say, wow, how do you manage to do that? Because we have projects in Asia, Africa, Latin America, Europe. And the way we manage that is because we get extended by then. All our projects are like in partnership. We bring others on board. Because for us, it's essential. There's no way that we can do everything. And the whole idea is that the more the merrier. And of course, you start like combining your expertise. But then if you have like local people, you're developing a project in whichever country, and then you can work with the local people. And then you start building this partnership, and then you take somewhere else. So it has been sort of the way that we've operated always. And it's the way that we've succeeded. And it's the way that we believe it has to be. Because no one has the truth, knows the truth on their own.
The incorporation of different ideas and the variety, which you mentioned earlier. And maybe we can, in fact, use that to circle back a little bit, because you touched again on nature. And earlier we talked about mental health and physical health. And I would be very interested, Carla, what does the term well-being mean to you?
I'd say well-being for me, I think it's a combination of things, starting with the idea of feeling well with yourself. And that has to do with having a purpose, but knowing and feeling capable that with whatever you have, being a skill, being my two arms, my two legs, my whatever, that you are willing and you feel that you can do something, sort of work towards that purpose. So that means that it's like I have to love myself. The well-being for me has to do a lot with loving yourself. Because if you love yourself, you give appreciation to the things that you know. We always tend to feel, especially where we are surrounded by people that they may be, I don't know, the top scientist, the top engineer, or whoever, not even the top, but we tend to feel that, oh, we are not as good as them. And we tend to focus all our attention in those things that we feel we are not as good as, and forget about the things that I think I'm very strong in this skill. And it could be, I'm very good at cooking. I'm very good at, I have a green thumb. I'm very good at planting stuff. So if we acknowledge that you're always going to be good in certain things, less good than others, there are going to be people who are better than you, people that are worse than you, but not always look yourself with that negative glass, but with the positive glass, and understand that these elements that you have, you appreciate in such a way that help you reach, work towards your purpose. I think that's when it's the realization of the well-being for me. Because I've met people that they are fantastic. Everyone tells them how good they are. And at the moment of truth, they are stopped. And they don't do things. And then you talk to them and they see that they're really down. And at the end, if you start trying to sort of dissect this thing, understanding, and sometimes it's really difficult. The mind is something very, very, very challenging to understand. And I'm not trying to, but this is sort of the way I tend to sort of depict it. It's about not appreciating what they bring to the table. No matter how many people come and tell them you're fantastic on this, they're going to find the excuses to say that's not true. They're telling you because they know you, whatever. So that well-being is because if you love yourself, you're going to be there and you're going to be producing good. It's not going to be perfect. It doesn't need to be perfect because you don't have the solution for everything, but you're going to contribute towards. I don't know if my explanation of the well-being was clear.
No, I think that makes perfect sense. What I would maybe add before you appreciate who you are and what you do, I think it's vital to understand who you are and why you do it. And usually it's a good way to act authentically, because if you don't and you act against your authentic self, chances are that you will realize such after years, after decades, and then you have to do a whole lot of work, I just want to call it. And when we talk about this well-being, and I don't know if you want to comment on that, but you can answer on a very micro level, or you can answer for Switzerland, or you can answer for a global level, or you can choose not to answer. But where do you see somewhat the level of well-being in today's society? And maybe that comes with certain hopes or wishes. You answer.
I would say, unfortunately, I would say very low. And I would say very low, and maybe with this I would like to extend my definition of well-being. First of all, within the definition I gave, because I don't know if it's something more spoken about nowadays, or it's just something getting worse. But this topic of well-being, the topic of mental health, the topic of comparing yourself always with the neighbor and stuff is, I don't know, I feel it, I don't know, in front of me, in front of my face constantly. And you live it through your kids or through your friends or through families, whatever, friends, and you name it. And I think that has to do with, within that realm, it has to do with this sort of society in which we live, that everything is I don't know, one of the downsides of technology is that it has brought so many things so fast that, again, we, of course, compared to that, we feel like we are a grain of sand in this, I don't know, huge beach. And everything is overwhelming. So, of course, within that, you have access to everyone and everything there. So if I want to sing, of course, I'm going to find the singer that sings better than myself. And it doesn't need to be a Christina Aguilera. It has to be maybe my friend there. So within that level, I would say there are too many elements that really goes against you. And we are sensitive people. We are like crowd animals that want to have feet somewhere. And of course, you're always maybe looking at yourself with like under that glass. So it's like I always say, the mirror is your worst enemy, because you tend to look at the mirror and you just look at the bad things. Well-being now, more broadly, in terms of the rest of the world, I would say, not where I'm living or my surroundings here, I think it's bad because we're at a stage where there's a lot of like injustices and unfairness. And name it from like there are a lot of, I don't know, we can name tons of topics, from the Black Lives Matters, this whole like LGBTQ plus issues, religious issues. There are so many extremes. And by extremes, I don't need like, I don't want to put like the good and the bad on ones. I think any extreme per se, I think is not good. Because when you are part of an extreme, being black or white, whatever, red or whatever is the opposite of red, you become sort of like a believer of that, and everything that is not that is sort of enemies. Is something level of tolerance is so low that how can we come together and realize our purpose if we don't work together? That's number one. The fact that also, because I'm in my bubble, that my beliefs, everyone surrounding me believe the same way. So I become very selfish. I'm comfortable here, so I don't have to think about the rest. And that generates some level of selfishness, quite high, I would say. And that's why we are becoming more or less sort of like affected by things that we see on TV. For me, it's like unbelievable that you're seeing, okay, there's a famine in a place, and you're seeing it on the news, and the journalists are there. Of course, they're trying to bring that to people, maybe to create awareness and try to make a change. But on the other hand, how is that we're seeing it on TV and at the same time you see a feast happening, or maybe you're going to a dinner party afterwards? And so that element, I cannot think of these people having any level of well-being. And it's not because they don't maybe love themselves, it's because they don't even have the basic element to give themselves the time to start loving themselves. And we fall into this thing before I said before, we cannot solve any issues. We are not solving like the basic access, let's say, to food. If you're hungry, you cannot think of anything else. Go on a hunger strike. I've never done it, but whenever I'm hungry after a day of being like doing something, and then at the end of the day, I feel hungry. So if you're not allowed to do that, how can I even love myself? So we have a huge, I'd say, number of people living in this planet, and maybe other species as well, that they are like in such conditions that their well-being is inexistent. It's not because they don't love themselves. They don't have the possibility of loving themselves. So maybe a few of them are given the chance to go out, develop something. Many of them go back and try to solve issues and stuff like that. But if you don't have that chance, like, you would never contribute, you would never be able to be yourself, to appreciate and to be part of a solution of anything, because you are starving. So that's why that level of well-being, I cannot, of course, like, I really believe as long as we have unfairness and justice, we are becoming, we see tragic things happening and we just like flip channels and stuff like that. I say, like, talking about well-being is something that is beyond that. We cannot talk about well-being until we have solved at least some minimum standards.
Definitely do agree. Carla, I have a couple of questions that I ask each and every podcast guest towards the end of the conversation. But before we go there, is there any topic, theme, or message that you deem we didn't discuss in big detail or sufficient detail in today's conversation that you would like to share?
To be honest, I don't know. The thing, there's so many things. That's what I love, the fact of the conversation. Like, it had been this flow. Maybe later on I'll regret because I say, okay, I should have said this or that. But right now I cannot think of. I say the only message is about, like, I don't know, care. Like, going back to that element, in whatever you do during your day, try to see why are you doing it. What is your, like, try to deep dive into your like brain and soul and understand what moves you. It doesn't matter what profession or what activity you're doing. Is it because why? And try to connect with that. And in that process, maybe try to think, how is the surrounding playing a role in that? And by surrounding, it can be the physical surrounding, your city, your house, your whatever, but then maybe try to think about nature. Let's start all working towards that, bringing nature back into our lives, but by very simple things. First of all, try to connect with our daily activity, not just rush throughout the day. See what we value and try to give ourselves time to spend more time dedicated to the things that we appreciate. And an example, in my case, I love gardening. But gardening, of course, under my principles, is my regenerative little sort of mini farm, not mini farm. I have a big vegetable garden, like I have my little greenhouse. And every second I have free, that's not a lot because like I'm a mom as well. I do things with my husband and a lot of other activities. But I enjoy doing that. And that has also brought me back to very simple things, to appreciate the really basic stuff. And I think it has been for a couple of reasons. One is the fact I've been like a garden lover for like devoted to gardening, I would say, for many, many years. But COVID, of course, intensified that because I was spending a lot of time at home, and it was my connection to nature. Although it's like very sort of like I like a vegetable garden, it's a quite intervened nature, let's say. But within that, I was trying to make it regenerative. That means I don't dig the soil, trying new things here and there. But the fact that in this overwhelming world, I would start from seed like a lettuce. And after a couple of months, you have a lettuce that I can eat. And that sense of gratification that was not instant, but it was rewarding because I was working towards that. And if you ask me if that lettuce was more expensive than the one in the supermarket, maybe it was because, of course, when you do buy like quantity, but it was everything. But that lettuce for me was priceless, as an example, because again, it connected me to something that I like. It gave me sort of like slowed me down because otherwise I'm rushing throughout my day. My mind is rushing. And this allows you to start valuing the very simple things of life. The little, I don't know, ant that's walking there, this other insect, the flower, the bird. And these little things at the end, these small grains of sand at the end, they can really create a beach. So if we manage to connect with our emotions, we would start appreciating things much more, and maybe with that we would eventually really start reconnecting with nature. So that would be my message.
Definitely. Thank you so much. And it resonates with me a lot. And maybe just a small side comment, if there's anything that comes to mind after this conversation. We are very well connected now, and we can always come back for round 2, 3, and 4. And in fact, I'm very much looking forward to that. It's always to have those reasons. And that leads me to the first of 3 final questions that I have. And you talked a little bit to it, but Carla, what is it that makes you hopeful?
I would say it's my nature. It's the fact that, and it's my, and not the nature, my nature is the fact that, again, the way that I was raised, the fact that if you care, if you authentically care and show and other and help, you receive this positive energy that you give comes back multiplied. And I feel that the movement that I see, because maybe I've been working a lot with youth as well, is like bigger and bigger. I maybe before, like when I started my career, this thing was unknown, like was a topic, maybe it was like the last thing in your like long list of topics that you want to talk about. But nowadays there's a movement. There's like the will of change, the fact that we know that we have to change, and the new generation that they are becoming voters. And I really encourage every youth to vote. It doesn't matter where you live, where you're from. Like always use it as a tool to sort of like raise your concerns, mobilize the causes that you care for. So I would say that's why I'm hopeful. I don't feel alone. I feel that we are more and more by the day. We're still maybe not that critical mass, But this is, think it as an exponential curve. You start very slow, very tall, and suddenly, puff, it goes like that. So that's what's kept me hopeful.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for sharing that. The second question would be, who are your mentors, or whom do you look up to personally?
I would say, from a very personal point of view, and I've mentioned before, my dad passed away many years ago, but I was really close to him. And I would say my mom as well, because the way they raised me, this idea of caring is something that sometimes you become so empathetic that it's hard because you always sort of like adopting the problems of others, let's say. But I think it may make life worth living, because you can have an impact. It doesn't matter if you impact one person or one little animal, but you can have an impact, and that is like the world to me. So that's why I would say, first of all, my parents, because of the way I was raised. In terms of current people, there's someone that I admire strongly, and is Sir David Attenborough, because he, like, the passion that he has, the level of knowledge that he has, but the passion. He's 96 currently, and he's still there, fighting, trying to sort of like raise awareness, spreading the message, but with a very positive lens. And that's why I love, because I did mention before, there's this scientist that I don't know, I really sort of appreciated all the work that he has led. That is Johan Rockström. And he's the director of the Potsdam Institute on Climate Impact Research, because that's where this whole like knowledge that we have about the planetary boundaries, how they are interrelated, and with the work done together with Sir David Attenborough, they've been managing to bring them back to Earth, translate them into messages of action, call to actions. And that becomes tools for the youth, for everyone, but especially the youth. So they are people who, for me, are like, I really commend for the passion that they have, the drive that they have. That for me, I would say, something. Again, I cannot care less if someone like is rich or poor, if he has or he doesn't have, he has a bigger house or smaller house. But if someone that is there, like passionate about something and willing to give it all, whoa, I'm there supporting that person. And these persons are doing that on a topic that is so close to my heart. And at ages that I wish that everyone at that age is going to be able to have that drive and keep it going.
Wonderful. I fully agree, and thank you very much for sharing that as well. And that leads me to the last and final question for today's podcast episode anyways, and it's a rather hypothetical question, and I call it the 3 truths. And Carla, I would like you to imagine that you're traveling all by yourself in space, actually for quite some time. Could be a couple of months or even years. And after all that solo travel, you encounter a human-like species, and they can only process 3 facts or 3 truths about humanity before they decide whether or not they want to get to know us. What is it that you tell them?
Okay, let me think. It's not an easy one. I think I would really bring the positive elements, but with caution. So I would use, if it's words, I would use caring, because I believe that we care, like it's something that is intrinsic there. It's sometimes more hidden, but we care. Everyone has to care about something. Hopefully it's not just about making money. That would be number 1. I would say beauty, but inner beauty above all. Yeah. But I would give a word of caution. That would be my 3rd. Caution in the sense that, like, be observant, appreciate, but I don't know. It sounds sort of like that, because it's not just don't believe whatever they say. It's not just about that. It's more that don't just fall in the trap of whatever, like, people tell you it's going to be always the truth. It's like, be wise. It's like be wise in terms of like the intentions can be good, but depending on how they're framed, you can get one message or get the other. So just be cautious in that. I would say those three, but this is difficult. I don't know. I have to be in that situation. I don't know if I'm gonna like it. However, you know why? Because I'm quite claustrophobic, so I cannot imagine myself in any kind of spaceship or anything like that. But if I ever be lucky enough to be teletransported there, and I have the opportunity to meet these are different species, right now I think of those words. Maybe tomorrow, maybe a year from now, I think differently. But it has to do with me feeling hopeful that there is good. But but we need always in life, and this is something to what I tell my kids here. I said at the beginning, Switzerland is a very safe place. Okay, meaning that it's very safe doesn't mean that things don't happen. Of course, everywhere some things are going to happen. So it's like there's freedom. You can do a lot of things. You can really enjoy that, but be cautious. It's sort of like that. That's the level of cautious that I'm referring to.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And with that, Carla, I'm very grateful for having you on the Just Another Mindset podcast, and I want to say thank you. And if there is any final message, words for the audience that you have today, it's all yours.
I want to thank you, first of all. I think like what I like of this podcast, when like you approached me and I started reading about it and listening to some episodes, is the variety that you have, because again, changing mindsets, this is something that will help us sort of like address issues, current very complex issues, but you don't just do it by sort of like working in silos. You really need to address it in a very holistic way. So bringing to the podcast different people with different backgrounds, different expertise, I think this generates this kind of like dynamic that we need. I love listening, and you asked me before, what about like exposing to things where it's not your comfort zone? It's not just like, especially if you listen to a podcast, it's not that I'm exposing, but listening to other things that are not necessarily my daily life, I think it's great, because again, it's different points of view of things or something common, but seen from a complete different angle. So I think it's extremely valuable. So I really appreciate what you're doing with the podcast. So,
thank you so much.
So I recommend the listeners to listen to the podcast.
Absolutely. And just being hopeful as well that we spark the interest for some people on topics to dive into a little bit deeper that they may or may not have thought about before. And yeah, with that, thank you once more, and talk very soon again.
Thanks, Ismail. Bye.
If you enjoyed this podcast and learned from it, please feel free to share this episode with a friend or two, and make sure to subscribe to the Just Another Mindset podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please use the next 10 seconds to give the Just Another Mindset podcast a rating, and know that you will help me to create more meaningful content like this, and also that it will help other people to find this content and get inspired as well. If there is any future topic or guest that you would like to hear more about on the Just Another Mindset podcast, please let me know by leaving a comment on YouTube or sending a mail directly to contact@ishmaelwondergarten.com. And if nobody told you lately, be reminded that you are worthy, you matter, and you can achieve anything.
Be yourself positive. Just another mindset.